Hi, I'm Congresswoman Lucy McBath and I represent Georgia's 6th Congressional District. And today I'm reading This is the Dream. This is the dream. These are the fountains that stand in the square, and the black and white signs say who will drink where. These are the buses, a dime buys a ride, but the people are sorted by color inside. These are the restaurants where whites only eat, at tables up front and at lunch counter seats. These are the libraries, two separate sections with separate bookcases and separate selections. These are the doors that are closed in the schools, and separate but equal is not just a rule, but a law that's enforced on the buses and trains and in theaters, restrooms, department store chains, and in libraries, hospitals, all public places, dividing up people by color and races with harsh written words that are slapped on the walls, denying both freedom and justice for all. These are the students who step through the doors where people of color have not walked before. These are the passengers on weary feet, walking until they can choose their own seat. These are the diners who sit and who wait at the whites-only counter, ignoring the hate. These are the marchers who forge through the street as they carry their message through shimmering heat. These are the leaders whose powerful voices lift up the marchers, demanding new choices for fair-paying jobs and a good education, to vote without fear, and to live in a nation where everyone's equal and judged from within, never jailed or arrested because of their skin, fighting firm without fists, sitting down, standing tall, pressing onward toward freedom and justice for all.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jo Davidge, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book, one of the 53 affiliates of the Center for the Book in the Library of Congress. We are here today as part of the Read Around the States program, a virtual series where readers of all ages can listen to members of Congress reading from their favorite books for young people. We are very honored that Congresswoman Lucy McBath, who represents Georgia's 6th Congressional District, is one of the members of Congress participating in this program. Earlier in this video, Congresswoman McBath read from This is the Dream by Diane Z. Shore and Jessica Alexander, illustrated by James Ransom. Today we are here to chat with Diane and Jessica and learn more about their book, which discusses the turbulent times in the United States, when despite the declaration that all men are created equal, the United States was still deeply segregated. So we were very, very excited that Congresswoman McBath picked This is the Dream as a selection for this particular program, not only because the Centers for the Book, I think, have a great connection to then President Jimmy Carter, who created the Centers for the Book in 1977, but that you all are Georgia authors and have such great Georgia connections. So we are very, very pleased as the Georgia Center for the Book to have you here this afternoon. So as a collaborative effort in doing this book, how was it that you all decided to write about issues like segregation in the Jim Crow South?
I had written a book called This is the Feast, which used the same format that This is the Dream uses. And then my editor at HarperCollins asked me if I had any other ideas for any more books. And at the time I was working on something else. And about that same time, I met Jessica. And I remember whenever I met her, we were at some kind of a swap meet where we swapped manuscripts with other people and we read them aloud. And Jessica was very shy, but by far the best author. And, you know, that I, you know, met at that swap meet. And afterwards, I asked her if she was interested in, you know, writing with me. And I think at that time I had just had my book hadn't come out, but I just had gotten a contract on it. So that's how we met as far as starting to collaborate.
Yeah, I hadn't done anything. That was the first event that I ever went to for anything related to writing. And I met Diane there. And then we talked about the book as a series, as a potential series. And it just seemed to make sense. I think, you know, I mean, I've always been interested in nonviolent, you know, protest as a vehicle for, you know, really creating change and empowering kids and empowering people to be able to it's really about the big idea of being able to create change, even imperfect change. I mean, where nobody's going to sit here and say that it, you know, is resolved or is better, but I think the empowerment aspect of that and the knowing that you can really, you know, do something if you know, take the risk and have the courage. I think that was kind of the impetus behind the book.
Well, I think the whole series was because the first one in the series was about hardships and then overcoming hardships. And so we wanted to keep that theme going. And I think the original was This is the March. Do you remember that? This is March. You know, yeah, because I was, you know, trying to think of ways that people struggled. And then I thought that the whole civil rights movement was going to be too broad. And then you don't remember starting with This is the March, and then we worked on that, and
many years.
Yeah. and then it was like, you know what, we don't have enough material, and then, you know, we just kind of expanded it to.
I think coming down to how to handle it was really like, yeah, that was a lot because it is, you know, it's complex and it's there's a lot of nuances and a lot of subtleties, and I remember us coming to the idea that we needed to be very concrete in how we handled it.
Right, because it's for kids. Yes.
Yeah. So.
Well, I mean, but I know the middle schoolers use it. I've seen it a lot in middle schools too. So, but I mean, that wasn't the age range we were writing for.
No, we didn't intend that originally, but that's cool.
That was one thing that I did find very interesting, because these are very heavy topics for a children's picture book. And that you had to navigate all of those nuances of these historical events. Some of them, even though they started as nonviolent, did escalate and become violent. How did you pick the certain events that you wanted to highlight? You know, in the book, there are, of course, the pictures of school desegregation, the bus boycott, the lunch counter sit-ins. When you all were formulating that, did you say to yourselves, or did you have conversations where you knew that you wanted to include something like the marches from Selma to Montgomery?
I think a lot of them are places that, you know, kids go and know well, right? The bus, the school, the library, puts it in a familiar context that, you know, is understandable. I think just right off the bat, like they're in a place they know when the stuff is happening, in a place that they go all the time. So I think that was part of our formulation, if I'm remembering that right. Part of our discussion was, how do we make this, you know, real for them?
Well, we also, our main focus, I think, was that we wanted it to be about the followers. And we never mention anyone's names. We don't put Rosa Parks.
Yeah, I remember us talking.
Yeah, Martin Luther King. I mean, I think there's a picture of him with, I think there's a picture of several people.
You're in there.
Several leaders, but we never in our verse ever mentioned a leader. It was always focused on the followers, because I mean, you can't have a movement without followers. And most of the books that we saw out there focused on leaders.
That was also something very interesting to me in going through the book. And, you know, James Ransom is not here today to talk about it. But, you know, he was very inspired by Romery Bearden, who's a very well-known folk artist. And the book is just beautifully illustrated. And, you know, I, of course, working in a library, love the library picture, but just the nuances in it when it's talking about libraries for white individuals and libraries for Black individuals. And you see along the side, the white individuals, clearly more books on the shelves versus the shelf for the Black libraries, where the selection is very, very sparse and a little bedraggled too. How did you all, you know, did you work with James on it? You know, so many authors of picture books don't get an opportunity. Did you all just write the text and sort of cast it out there and let the artist decide how and what style to illustrate the book?
Give that to you, Jessica.
Well, you know, that's how it usually works, is the book gets handed off to the artist and they go. But I can't imagine a better, I mean, I wouldn't have had, you know, much to say about it anyway, because he's just phenomenal. Just all of his illustrations are just, I mean, they're gorgeous and also impactful, and they're everything that you want in your book to really make it come alive. I think Diane, you had mentioned that we did have the one
page, the classroom, where these are the doors that are closed in the schools. And he didn't illustrate with doors. There were no, that really was not exactly what I was picturing. And so the editor wanted us to change it to, these are the classrooms closed in the schools. And we just thought that was too clunky, to use the CL again. Anyway, but so we just, the fact that doors were closed was sort of a metaphor that we were using throughout, and we wanted to keep that metaphor going. And so we kind of fought for us to keep, these are the doors that are closed in the schools, and she let us. But she didn't ask him to change his illustrations. The illustrations stayed the same. And that's pretty typical. I think it's a lot more expensive to change illustrations than it is to change words.
Yeah, but I mean, I can't imagine it coming out better than it did. No. I mean, I don't think I would have added anything to what he did.
Well, you know, when the Georgia Center for the Book, when we look at books every year for the books all Georgians should read, and when we started including picture books, you know, just a few years ago on our children's list, you know, we all started to do a little more of a deep dive into the role of illustrators and how that also is very impactful to telling the story in a picture book. And one of the things that I enjoy to do is the end papers, and taking a good look at the end papers and maybe finding things in the pictures that also tell a story. And I found that here in this particular book, that it just wasn't reading the text, but it was going back to reading a painting or reading a picture and finding little things that also told a story beyond the words. And what I loved about the end papers of the book is that, you know, you sort of start here with the Jim Crow South and very somber, sepia colored pictures. But then when you look at the end papers,
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's changed.
it's very brightly colored.
You know, I
all
never thought of
colored
that
faces.
before.
And, you know, I found it to be really, really impactful. That, you know, don't just close the book, turn until the very last page,
Right.
which, you know, is the end
Yeah.
papers sometimes on that. So, well, thank you both so very much for joining us today. It's been a delight to talk with you and to hear a little bit of the story behind, of course, your wonderful book, This Is the Dream. Once again, you can find out more about the Georgia Center for the Book at georgiacenterforthebook.org and find more videos in the Read Around the State series at the Center for the Book in the Library of Congress at read.gov and loc.gov. Thank you all so very much for joining us, and we will see you all again very, very soon.